welcome to Season 6, Episode 16 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading James Hitchcock's History of the Catholic Church from the Apostolic Age to the Third Millennium. This time we are talking about modernity, looking at the Catholic Church sort of in the 1800s into the early 1900s is roughly the time frame that we're looking at here. Again, we're going to split this one into two parts, roughly halfway splitting up this chapter. But there's some really neat stuff, I thought, in this chapter that I thought was really good. The author made some good points, especially on sort of liberalism versus conservatism, how those sort of emerging ideologies either represented or went against church teachings in a way. So I thought it was a good chapter.
Yes, but he was really not. I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to the conservative liberal, but a lot of the descriptions of the liberal would be the classical liberal,
Yes,
not the present day progressive Marxist communist people.
Yes, true. Very true.
And the conservatives would be really, I think we consider them royalists, you know, as opposed to the intellectual conservative movement that started really in earnest after and during the French Revolution.
Very true.
In any event, so let's take it away. Starting with, I thought that his introductions, he must spend a lot of time writing and contemplating the first paragraph of every chapter because he does a good job. Don't you think?
I would agree.
So I'm going to quote from it. This is a quote. Beginning before 1800 and extending over 2 centuries, there occurred simultaneously the greatest revolutions in the history of the world: political, social, economic, intellectual, scientific. And that pretty much sets the stage for this subject matter of modernity, which is, the revolution, mainly the French Revolution, and the effect of these kind of societal upheavals on the history of the church and theology and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. So, where should we should begin with due to the revolution in France. There was after the revolution, I should say, or maybe even during it, even skeptical people, according to this author, I think this is accurate. Even skeptical people thought that the religion was necessary. I mean, they saw the madness and the religious attitude of these crazy French revolutionaries, and they're like, man, even the people that were skeptical before, or even people that were still skeptical of religion, realized we need to have some sort of moral code and some sort of structure, because this anarchy is crazy. And there was a specific, author, he was a diplomat, Joseph de Maistre.
Just de Maistre, yeah.
Maistre, who died in 1821, so that gives you the time period we're talking about. Talked about how the revolution had been a cleansing fire that restored Christendom. Basically, there was a whirlpool or a maelstrom ordained by God to throw away the old vestiges of the old church, the corrupt church and the corrupt politicians, and just burned everything down to start anew. Thanks be to God, I guess. Yeah. So, and then you're really talking about after Napoleon's defeat, there's this Congress of Vienna. We're talking about 1789. And that really, they try to carve Europe back up into the monarchies that were in existence prior to the French Revolution and all the upheavals and all that kind of stuff. And then, you still had, the different, the papal states trying to get back, the Pope getting the papal states back, Catholic Austria, led the way in the restoring of their pre-revolutionary regimes. But these other movements that we talked about in the last podcast, in the last 2 episodes, were still around. And then the author really kind of gets into, these 2 competing ideologies. Yeah. He called.
Yeah, I also want to kind of mention with de Maistre, and where we're looking at like trying to recarve Europe back up. He believed that the revolution revealed, he says, the anarchic character of popular sovereignty. And so this is where we get into these ideological splits is, basically who's on the side of popular sovereignty and who's not, for the most part. Who saw the French Revolution as, well, maybe we can get something good out of this. And on the other side, wow, this was awful. Popular sovereignty sucks in every form, essentially.
Right. And so the author describes, I think he accurately describes at the time, conservatives were really the traditionalists. That you rely on leaders, and the conservatives would, the conservative and the religious leaders agreed to suppress any rebellions. So all the different factions of religious leaders said, we may hate each other, and all the rest of you are going to hell, but we agree we're putting down any rebellions because they all hate us and we hate all them. And then there's this description of liberalism, which is really what I call classical liberalism, which is belief in the sovereignty of the individual, individual rights and all that sort of thing. So the Vatican at the time initially was pretty diplomatic with regard to, okay, which side are we on, or who we're supporting. They kind of thought maybe you'd say opportunistic, until Pope Gregory the 16th, and he basically had a de facto alliance with the conservatives, or I call them the royalists or the traditionalists at the time, and really disfavored the people that could be considered liberals at the time.
Yeah, but he does mention, before that, with these other couple popes, Pope Pius VII and Pope Pius VIII, really kind of just trying not to die as much as possible, trying to make sure that the papacy is just still somewhat relevant and not angering anybody. So they did support, a lot of Latin American, revolutions, essentially, or recognize the new countries that came out of those revolutions. So kind of just staying out of the limelight until you have Gregory the 16th, who is then kind of, really promoting conservatism over liberalism.
True. So, that there's this liberal order, the belief of, the individual rights, and also that the people get to decide who the leaders are, and that was, I thought this was kind of an interesting way to look at it, and I hadn't really thought of this. It was described as, quote from this on page 344, I think. The idea of popular sovereignty was therefore seen as a kind of idolatry of the popular will. Never really thought of it that way. That the existing order that existed with the royal, the kings and all that, of course, we've gone through that in earlier chapters, I think in another podcast, was ordained by God. That they're in power because God put them in power or allowed them to be in power. And it shouldn't be overturned by human will, because the simple human nature of people, that if you just take a vote, that our sinful nature would most likely make the wrong decision. I never really considered the idea that the popular will would be a form of idolatry, but it kind of resonates with me a little bit with this I'd call like fetishizing the majority rule in a republic like our country.
Yeah, I think
majority says this, majority says that. I don't care. It's either right or wrong. Or it's good or it's bad for the most people. But just because most people mark yes or no on a ballot doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, anyway. I think that's especially prominent in America. Like you're kind of saying. I think you're kind of starting to see sort of a shift from, Republicans, who I think for a long time were sort of the sort of, majority rule, this is the best system ever, and it always works 100% of the time as long as the people vote, and, it's the will of the people. And now you're starting to kind of see, I think, especially on the right, with people like, hold on, just because the people are voting, does that really mean, kind of what you're saying, just because a majority thinks this thing, does that mean that it is good? And I think you're starting to see that a lot. I think especially on the right, whereas the left, I think, is still very much all in on, majority makes right, except when they disagree, I guess.
Right. Yeah. The leftists are transactional when it comes to majority rule, in my opinion. But I think you're right that the Republicans are becoming that way. Parties like, well, yeah, let's take it to a vote unless we're going to lose.
Yeah.
and the funny thing is that it forces us to then look at the merits of different political issues, because it's like, you can't just say majority rules, because sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't. Why do you like this and not that? But
yeah.
So the church ultimately condemned this liberalism as a subversion of the order. The liberals, of course, condemned the church as an enemy of progress. And anytime they got power, they curtailed the church. There's a specific references a couple times in this book about the Masonic order becoming more atheist and overtly hostile to the church. And I think that's very much true within the papal states or papal states, which I think we'll discuss a little bit later in the chapter. So what kind of liberal coercion are we talking about? Well, mob violence, as you might, that's consistent through the ages, where mob violence would occur and then the authorities wouldn't punish them, which ends up being similar to government action, which is what we have now. Then, of course, bishops being put in prison or forced into exile. But, of course, the church leaders, if they're in power at the time, they didn't believe in freedom of religion either, generally. Yeah. They asserted that there's only one true religion, which is, if they're Catholic, then it's Catholic. If it's something else, it's something else. And they didn't believe in freedom of speech because they figured that's like trying to get people to sin and drive them away from God. So they don't. It's not like there was tolerance on one side generally in this beginning stages of this kind of philosophical conflict. It was like, but certainly the liberal order was not a live and let live type thing. Yeah, they're attacking the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I mean, the quote that he has here is the error has no rights. That's essentially where the religious groups are coming from. It's like, if I'm in power, why would I allow you to do something that I see as leading people, away from heaven, essentially? If you're going out in the street proclaiming, the church is heretical, blah, 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 well, of course, to a Catholic person, why would you let that happen, essentially?
You know what I really like about going through this history, kind of as an aside, is that there's so many beliefs that I found repugnant, but the book spells out a logical reason to follow that. The view you just espoused, not that you believe in that, but it has a certain consistency to it. Yeah. I can understand better. And the author does a really good job of giving us a synopsis of their point of view. That there was a reason why it wasn't just I'm right and you're wrong. I'm powerful, so I'm going to subjugate you. It's they had a kind of a believable religious view that people that have freedom of speech to say things contrary to the faith was an evil that they had to fight for the good of the people, the good of the speaker, and the good of the listener. So it's I mean I do appreciate because I'm thinking, well, that makes sense.
No, I agree. And I think throughout college, I've kind of come to understand that particular view more. Not that I'm going to stop anybody from having their freedom of speech, of course. But especially with my friends and stuff, if I have friends who are Protestants, I'm not going to stop being friends with them because they're Protestants. I'm like, you have to go to Catholic church, but I'm going to be because I've had discussions with my friends up here and both with friends back home of well, what do you see in your church as being better than Catholicism, essentially? Because it's if I believe that this is the right way, why would I just sit back and be yeah, everything's equal, right? It's especially if these people are my friends, I'd want them to do the right thing, essentially.
Right. I'll talk offline about this a little bit. I just joined a discussion group.
Oh.
But
you don't do that. This is a new thing for you.
I'm trying to branch out. I should have mentioned it before we can. But anyway, it's a lot of religious philosophy talk. So we'll just say that. And it's what do you say, ecumenical? I mean, there's people of various religions, and so at the first meeting, I shouldn't have made this joke, but we talked about big C Catholic versus little C Catholic. The Catholic being the entire church or whatever. And I said, well, generally my philosophy is we're all Catholics. Some people just don't know it yet. And there's only 4, well, 5, because one guy brought this young man with him, but I think it went over like a lead balloon with the evangelical, oddly enough. But the others were fine with it.
Interesting.
I thought it had a good timing on it. The joke was good, but anyway. So I do kind of believe that. My attitude is, you're welcome. Like you're welcome to be a Catholic,
Mhm.
not like thank you, you're welcome, but
Yes.
like I've done something, you're welcome. But I just as long as like the various Christian denominations, they're I mean, the people who are religious are generally trying to do the right thing.
Sure.
And I always know that. It's like if you're going to church every Sunday or you're going to the synagogue, and I'm talking about Christian.
Mhm.
And I mean, I know there's some other sects and other religions that may have that may be different. And I don't know people like that, but the people that I know that are either Jewish or other Christian faiths, they're all good people. They're trying to do the right thing, and
Mhm.
and so if I have discussions with them about religion, it's always at like the 10,000-foot level. I'm never trying to, and maybe I should, try to convert them or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't think that works unless, if you just talk about the things that, because all I do is I talk about the things that work for me.
Mhm.
I never criticize somebody else's beliefs.
Yeah. I don't criticize. But especially with the friends that I'm talking about up here, we get into sort of like, a lot of the differences between each group and everything. It's like, I think just naturally when I'm talking about this stuff, it's like, I want to show, my reasoning because I think my reasoning is correct. Because if I didn't think I was correct, I would not be Catholic, and I would be in a different church, because I'm not just, here because I was born into the faith. It's because I think it's correct. I think it's the right one.
Sure. Yeah, and that's good. That's a good attitude to have. But it's, you have to have a purpose behind it too. So if you're real strident about it, you're not going to get it anyway. But
true.
I get it. All right. So, so there was a toleration in some respects during this era, but there were limits. Generally, the toleration between the religious, as far as the civil authorities between these various religions, was just to avoid civil strife. It wasn't trying to do it necessarily because your religious views said we should tolerate all these things, but it's kind of funny that they had certain restrictions. Generally, they wouldn't allow a new church to have a steeple, especially a steeple larger than any of the other churches that are the accepted religion. So if some unofficial congregation or a congregation that was not recognized or supported by the powers that be, is they may not even be able to have any steeple, and they certainly wouldn't be able to build one taller than the other ones, and they consider that an advertisement. And I thought it was interesting in England, the Anglican Church had churches. They had allowed other denominations to have essentially churches, but they were not allowed to call them churches. They had to call them chapels.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
I don't really know what the difference is, but I guess it's it's not quite fully a church, I guess. I don't know. But,
well, I think that's the reasoning for, like, in an airport, you don't have a church, you have a chapel. Because I think it's supposed to be like, where any faith can pray in, essentially, if you're Christian. So it's like, it's not actually our church, but it's a religious building, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel different in one of those non-denominational chapels than I do, even if it's a specific religious denomination that I don't belong to.
Yeah.
It is.
Interesting.
I just feel like I'm at the mall. I'm at a store, or a meeting room at the local civic center or something. It's not religious. It's just it's transactional or something. I don't know. So, and it talks about 345. That I think the most important issue was, and it was the most important part of the liberal programs, which are generally hostile to the religion at the time, was universal state-sponsored education. And boy, they're right about that. Getting the clerics and the devoutly religious out of schools was imperative to undercut religious belief.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the author says, too. He says, which to a great extent was intended to bring about the secularization of society. That was a lot of the times the express purpose of having these state-sponsored schools.
Yeah, and in the United States, they've won.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I didn't really appreciate it in my youth. Of course, I didn't appreciate anything in my youth, but like getting like the big fights over prayer in school and the Bible in school, public schools. I was always on the side of the libertarians or the anti-religious. We have the government schools, but now I see, but
Yeah.
I think we're seeing a pushback, and I think the real fix to that is the charter schools or the independent schools. So
Mm.
you could still get the funding for education, but it could be through through a Catholic school,
Mhm.
because it's not an establishment of religion. Money flows to kids and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's all these armchair lawyers that say, well, the Constitution says you can't pay for tuition at a religious school. Well, they're just wrong.
Mhm.
I have seen a kind of an interesting growth in classical liberal or liberal arts high schools and grade schools.
Yeah.
Especially in the Catholic setting. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the amount of student growth, they're still small, but there's one actually in West St. Louis County that I didn't even know existed.
Interesting.
Small, but they have like a group that they said it's the Chesterton curriculum.
Interesting.
But they have actual conservative Catholic curriculum, and they're teaching Greek and Latin and the great books and all that stuff in high school. And of course, they're coming out with a high school diploma, which is better than most people get with a college degree.
Yeah. I was going to say,
well-rounded.
Yeah, nothing has made me appreciate going to a Catholic high school more than going to a public state, liberal arts university. Just kind of seeing that and hearing stories from people who did go to public schools and stuff like that. Just like how kind of weird some of those stories are. But I mean, even just here, just with how the education's set up, sometimes it's just it's bizarre. It really is.
Yeah, and I'm struggling. I teach a community college course, and I'm struggling with the standards. I'll have to decide how I'm going to go forward with those things.
Yeah.
But
And I think a lot of the problem is just, colleges overall, because I know a lot of the Christian schools, aren't too much better anyway. I mean, especially a lot of like the Jesuit universities and stuff like that. But
well, what I mean is like just reading and reading.
Oh, well, that too. Yeah, no, absolutely.
The basics but we can talk offline about that. I don't want to badmouth anybody or the program, and I think it can be improved pretty quickly. But in any event, so and then maybe ironically, England ended up being the closest to complete toleration, religious toleration, when in 1829 they granted Catholics almost all the civil rights that Anglicans had, and I think that was really in response to the French Revolution. They saw hey, these Catholics aren't so bad. They aren't like those crazy revolutionaries like Robespierre and the rest of those nuts. So even after the purges and all the strife between the Anglicans and Catholics and all that, they were maybe the closest to having complete toleration of various religious sects. So the Papal States, the Papal States ended up that they were reconstituted, as I mentioned earlier, and of course, what did they do immediately? Well, they put the clergy back in all the government posts, and and they put the Jews back in the ghettos, because that's what Catholics do, right? And it's just so I don't understand the Jew hatred. I just it's and at this time they not only put them in the ghettos, which ghettos were, they had their own separate neighborhoods. They were not allowed to live in other neighborhoods. Literally, they had a Jewish neighborhood, period. And they could work, in other areas, but even then they kind of segregated those. But then they made them go to church on Sundays to listen to sermons where they're harangued about their laziness and their refusal to convert to Christianity, which I'm sure was really effective. The liberals, the anti-religious people in the Papal States, which included the what am I talking about?
The Masons.
The Masons. They're rebellious and they're committing acts of terrorism. And of course, what's the response to that? Well, mass executions, of all the leaders and battles and war and all that stuff. So that's going on around this time. So you can see it's kind of dispiriting.
Yeah.
For somebody that believes that the Catholic Church is a good thing, but you see, man, gosh, it's a human enterprise, of course, so there's bad things as well. So then I thought this was the Lemonius. Have you ever heard of that guy before?
Probably Lemoni, but yeah, I've never heard of him. Yeah.
So he was a interesting thinker. He was a head of a movement, a liberal society, but he believed in a liberal society infused by Christianity. Very spiritualistic, and of course he was ultimately condemned by the Catholic Church. But he seemed to inspire a lot of people that were pretty tolerant and devout. And some of this stuff kind of sounded pretty decent to me.
Yeah, because he thought, these revolutions are inevitable. Let's essentially make the clergy lead them. Make sure that Christianity is like at the forefront and is the driving force of these revolutions, rather than trying to conserve what's remaining essentially.
Right. And it's looking at like the people being the sovereign. And if you're following the sovereign, maybe you should follow the people instead of this guy who just was born the son of a king. And so there's a kind of a discussion of nationalism. I don't know if you want to talk about liberal Catholicism. I think it was pretty much just that what we talked about. But discussion of nationalism, which is a definition of nationalism. And the author mentions how it really came into its own in France, after the Revolution. When Napoleon was, had a general draft and really talk about patriotism and we're fighting off, these other imperial royalist empires that are coming to kill the revolution and the great people of France.
Frames it, it's like instead of loyalty to a king, to one person, you are loyal to the nation as a separate entity, as its own thing.
Yeah, and I like how the author puts it that the state becomes kind of a church. You're believing the state, and I think that's really, where we call them the statists or the leftists are today. They believe that the government is kind of a church that they believe in above all things. Whenever there's a crisis, what's the government going to do? What's the federal government going to do about that tornado? Why does the federal government have to do anything about a tornado? I don't understand that. Anywho, so Poland had, a Catholic nationalism. There's a mention of that. I don't know that I need to go into it. And
I think it's funny. I do just want to mention that, well, I guess it's not funny, but the sufferings, one poet compared the sufferings of the Polish people to those of Jesus himself and proclaimed Poland as the Christ among nations. It's like, man, our country's been through so much. We are the suffering Jesus Christ of every nation in the world, which is...
and they had no idea how bad it was going to get. It was bad enough then, and then they end up with Germany invading them and Russia, and then the communists ruling over them till the 1980s, 90s. Poland's got a rich history of first as an empire, then being conquered by all sorts of different powers. So there's again another kind of description of Pope Gregory the 16th, and always siding with the rulers and the royalty and all that stuff. So kind of going on with those. If there's a nationalistic sense with the rulers, then that Pope was with the rulers. Belgium around this time became independent in 1830. And they separated from the church, but they protected the rights of the church. That being, I think, the Catholic Church, right? Wasn't the Netherlands and who had Belgium? Was it the Netherlands or was it?
Spain had a portion of the Netherlands, so I think Belgium did split from, I guess, technically what was owned by Spain. Right.
So correct. Okay. So they still protected the rights of the church, so that was good. And then there was discussion of Ireland and a guy, Daniel O'Connell, the Liberator. I like that moniker, who died in 1847. So it gets an idea of the time we're talking about. And he had a Catholic inspired movement for individual rights and the rights of the Catholic majority, overwhelming majority. And he ended up dying on his way to a trip to Rome, if I remember correctly. But of course, there was the potato famine, which was really, if you read anything about the potato famine, it's no wonder the Irish hated the English, because they had potatoes for them, but they grew a lot of grain for export, and there was a small minority of the English who owned the vast majority of Ireland, and they had these tenement farmers, and these people were starving to death, and they were still forced to work the fields and to harvest the crops so that they could be shipped in boats, either to England or to Europe or to wherever, while these people were just literally starving to death. And they lost, so much of their population to starvation and disease, and so many of them had to leave. And such a tragedy. But later, there's a discussion about how Ireland became per capita the most Catholic of all nations, and even they had so many clergy. Half of the ordained priests were serving overseas because they had too many priests. A lot of them came to America.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of Irish priests in America. You had some other comments, or
no? That was a good summary.
So then, Italy and Germany were really the nationalist movements. I think, in my opinion, had the most effect. Meaning that they had different regional powers, and that nationalist spirit kind of informed the people that ended up collecting the power and unifying under a German banner. And then I think
a lot of people forget that, like, technically Germany and Italy are fairly recent, nations, as of themselves. We've had, various different groups that have ruled those territories under kind of similar, backgrounds, but they really weren't a unified nation. There was never any group that really saw themselves as Italians or as Germans really up until the time period that we're talking about. They saw themselves as the individuals of those smaller principalities within the larger whole, if there even was a larger whole for a lot of its history.
Because I think Italy wasn't really its own country of Italy until the 1900s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. Because you had the Papal States, you had like the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies at one point in time. It's just constantly sort of trading hands between whoever the rulers of a lot of those regions are.
And I think Germany wasn't. I think it was around the same era too.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's see. All right, papal authority, I think, is the next one. Papal authority and power. And there's an example, I think it was just because the author really liked this story or was fascinated by it. Pius the Ninth, Pope Pius the Ninth, had a Jewish boy taken from his parents and raised him as a ward of the Pope. And didn't think there was anything wrong. Why are people all upset about this? Even the Catholics are like, I don't think you could do that. Because the kids...
he had been secretly baptized, by a maid.
This Jewish kid. Oh, well, he's Catholic now. Give me your boy. But that's the kind of leader that the Catholic Church had. Well, he's Catholic. He shouldn't be with those Jews, I guess. I don't know. So then, there was published in 1864. I think it was by that same Pope, right?
Yeah, Pope Pius the Ninth. This is really who we're talking about through the next couple pages here. Interesting guy. 1864,
he published the Syllabus of Errors, which sounds like something I would publish.
Absolutely.
These are all the things in which you are wrong. So he condemned the idea that the state is the final. The idea that the state is the final authority in anything. And he asserted papal authority over everything, but especially anything of the soul, the spirit, and thought, and condemned religious freedom and freedom of speech. So the same theory that we talked about before. And let's see, there was a quote that I wanted to do here. Oh, yeah, here it is. The summing up, Pius proclaimed, if anyone thinks that the Roman pontiff can and should reconcile himself and come to terms with progress, with liberalism, and with modern civilization, let him be anathema. I love that quote.
I think Pope Francis needs to read about this guy. I also liked the
about us, I think.
I also like the point that he says here just above that. He says the ultimate problem as Pius saw it was the liberal idea of a quote-unquote neutral state without an official religious foundation, which was a denial that society needed to be subordinated to divine law. And I think that's another sort of concept that you're seeing, come back up, because I was mentioning earlier, and I think a lot of times, both right and left saw, it's possible to have a state that's just neutral in terms of all moral issues. We could just have the state. They just take care of, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and, economy and stuff. They don't need to worry about moral affairs. Everything's neutral up there. But now you're especially seeing, and I know we've probably mentioned Josh Hammer before on this podcast, but he's sort of one of the leading writers on that. There is no such thing as values neutrality. No matter what nation you're living under, they are putting forth some kind of values. And I think that's what Pius is saying here too. There is no values neutral state. And so if we're going to acknowledge that, every state is going to have a value system behind it, it should be a Catholic value system, as the Pope saw it, of course.
Yeah. And I think it worked in the United States for so long because there were certain values that were just assumed.
Mm-hmm.
The Judeo-Christian theory behind everything was universal in our society. And when that doesn't hold, then you're like, well, it wasn't really neutral all along. There's this foundation it was built on. And now what do you do when the foundation is crumbling? Well, there's the government has values. It's just now that it's all questioned is changing. So anyway, moving along in the history of the church, ultimately the papal states fell to the Sardinians. 1870 was a surrender from Pope Pius IX, I think still too, right? Yep. And he was a self-imposed prisoner of the Vatican from that point forward. But what that allowed him to do, or what that forced him to do, is to focus on church reforms within the church at that point. And one of the things he did was expanding the membership of the College of Cardinals and some other reforms. But I mean, it's there are so many different forces that are circulating around. I think it was Napoleon III had to withdraw his troops because there was some sort of rebellion or civil war or something, and that left the Pope almost defenseless. And rather than fighting to the death, he raised the white flag of surrender, and Sardinians really started the unification of Italy at that point.
Yeah, and I do think some of the reforms are worth mentioning a little bit more. You mentioned broadening membership in the College of Cardinals and basing it primarily on merit. Establishing colleges in Rome for seminarians from all over the world, appointing bishops with less regard for the opinion of secular governments, establishing the custom of ad limina to the threshold visits of bishops to Rome, and using papal nuncios or heralds as representatives to the various national hierarchies, establishing many new dioceses. So a lot of this is very good stuff that I think Pope Pius the Ninth is doing here in the reforms that he was kind of forced to do because he couldn't do anything else.
Sure. So then Napoleon III after one of the Napoleons. I can't remember.
Napoleon III, who was the nephew of the famous Napoleon, and then his son was Napoleon II, but he never actually ruled. But Napoleon III did rule in this sphere.
You got to check out the Napoleon movie. That was pretty good.
Yeah, it does look good.
Coming out, I think, on Thanksgiving, isn't it?
So sometime soon. That sounds right.
So after he's defeated, there was a huge religious revival in France. A lot of spirituality, and you kind of see that a lot of times in society when there's a tamping down, and then some freedom, then people are drawn to it. And there was a return of the Jesuits for time being, but of course that's with controversy. And then certain monastic revivals, monasteries and appreciation for that way of life in France. And the formation of new orders. Let's see where I was at. And there's a discussion of St. John Vianney.
St. John Vianney, yep.
Who is familiar to us as the name of a local boys' high school in our. So it's always fun for me to read more about the people that these buildings or towns and all the churches and schools are named after. So I just have here Seabook. He's an odd duck. And I'll just quote from the book. He had a powerful sense of the sinfulness of mankind and longed to become a Trappist and devote himself to penance. But instead, he'd spend as many as 18 hours a day in the confessional. If you're there for 18 hours a day, I guess half of it is, I'm sorry for taking so long. But anyway, so I just thought that was kind of interesting.
I did like the mention here also. I don't know if you were going to say that, but when offered a ribbon of honor by the French government, he declined because it had no resale value and thus would be of no use to his work with the poor. Yeah. I thought that was funny.
I can't sell it, so I don't want it.
Yeah.
So this kind of thing is pretty nice, I guess. Also rude. Because if it didn't have resale value, it's just a nice trinket for them to honor you. You would think you'd just say, thanks, man.
You would think.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, you get $5 for it too. No, just keep that stupid thing. I can't resell it. the Irish revival. I'm just making a point of this. So so after the Tamo famine, it was like I said, I already mentioned that most Catholic society in the world, so many priests they move abroad and all that good stuff. I didn't really need to talk. I didn't think I needed to talk about these other specific people unless you
talk about St. John Bosco.
Want to?
Yeah, well, he founded the Oratory of St. Francis de Sales to work with abandoned or abused boys. That's what the author says about him. I know him as the Bosco stick guy because like at least once a week in grade school, we would have Bosco sticks for lunch, which were like bread stuffed with cheese. Because there's a story about him like giving food to the poor in that way, where he had to sneak it out in some way, like under his clothes or something, bread and cheese, and so then the bread stuffed with cheese became known as a Bosco stick.
I wonder if the bread just smelled like cheese after it was under his clothes.
Ew, Dad, it's gross.
It smells like Parmesan cheese. Why does it smell like Parmesan cheese? Well, there's a kind of a long section about Marian apparitions, and we're not talking about people named Marian. We're talking about people seeing Mary, and some of these are more prominent than the others. There's Anna Katharina Emmerich, a German nun who experiences stigmata. Do you think people really experience this stigmata? I'm always suspicious of that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a hard thing to fake for very long.
Easy to fake.
What do you mean?
As long as you have two hands, and fingernails, you can fake it.
What do you mean?
Yeah, you better put gloves on them or something. Because they could just like poke their thumbnail in the opposing arm or wrist or hand. Or I guess it's always in the hand. I guess in the palm.
Yeah.
I always figured
they're big open wounds.
Yeah,
have you seen the pictures of Padre Pio?
You don't think you can make it a big open wound on your hand?
I mean, I guess.
Yeah,
it'd be a lot of work for little gain.
Would we know the name Padre Pio if he hadn't done it?
Well, I guess that's true.
That's a good
but
point. There's my cynical side coming out.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's something about the stigmata. Why would God do that? For what purpose is that? I don't think that's a thing.
All right.
Anyway, so there was what else want to say? St. Catherine Labouré. Do you remember that one?
I do.
That reference. There's a grade school up in St. Louis County that's named after St. Catherine Labouré. I didn't know this, that she was the story was that she had an apparition of Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary gave her the design for the miraculous medal that became a popular Marian devotion. I think I have a miraculous medal.
I think I do too.
See, I can just see her, sitting down with Mary, and Mary saying, you make this little medal, and put this design, and that's the miraculous medal. Do you think that happened? I don't.
All right.
Anyway, 3 children in a French village in La Salette in 1849 saw a vision of Mary. It attracted a bunch of pilgrims. Other visions followed. Is that Knock in Ireland? And then Lourdes, that's the big one.
Yeah.
Lourdes, Italy, right? Because there was a peasant girl in 1858. Had a series of visions of the lady, Mary. So that's and there's even a Hollywood film, The Song of Bernadette, about the young girl. Countless reported miracles of healing. I'm more apt to believe people seeing apparitions than I am that they've experienced this stigmata. I don't know if that's more reasonable or not. It'd be a lot easier to fake seeing something.
Yes, I was about to say, if you're so skeptical of the big open wounds on someone's hands, I think someone saying, hey, I saw Mary would maybe raise some more red flags for you.
Well, I'm thinking that like the angels appeared to Mary.
Yeah.
Joseph and to Moses. But did any of them stab him in the hands? You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah.
Did any of them like do anything to them? Or is there? Maybe I know I'm not an expert in the Bible, but are there other people? Are there people in the Bible who suffered an injury to their physical being
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, like Sodom and Gomorrah, that God killed the entire town or whatever. I mean, that's a little different. Or like the Egyptians were drowned in the Red Sea.
Hmm.
But I'm just saying, like an individual.
Well, I mean, there's
About
the
a
whole
devout person.
the whole book of Job.
Yeah, that's different and more particular. I think
He took away like everything he owned, and everybody he knew died.
Yeah, but did anything physical happen to him?
I mean, his whole family died.
I understand that.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yes, I'm with you on that.
Okay.
There's just something about it. I just feel like it's Barnum and Bailey stuff. I don't know.
All right.
But anyway, I don't mean to convince you that that they're not. But I'm just saying. Anyway, Fatima, Portugal, 1917. That's the 3 girls, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Two girls, 1 boy, I think. 3 peasant children. Yeah.
There was 3 girls.
No. 2 girls, 1 boy.
That was a big deal. Wasn't the Fatima one where Mary said something, pray for peace? It was like right
before the outbreak of World War I.
World War I. Yeah. That seems to be a reasonable message.
Yeah.
For a God that is omniscient.
Mm-hmm.
That you all ought to get together and start praying for peace because bad things are coming. You're all going to slaughter each other.
Yeah.
But it happened anyway. So the Catholic Church and all these kind of things is still is to this day very cautious about these kind of events and claims at first, especially, and then they try to do. I do think they try to do their best to try to verify the claims. Especially like miracles for saints. I don't know that they really did their due diligence for Pope John Paul II, making him a saint. Also for my favorite saint,
your Mother Teresa.
I don't think they did any due diligence on that. But she's popular. So anyway, but the church, in one instance, even had a special medical bureau that was set up to investigate alleged cures, which at Lourdes. So that's a good. I think it shows a certain amount of responsibility that you might not see from other churches who claim some divine intervention. It's like, wait, we need to see if these people are just psychotic or whatever.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's also important for your point, for your skepticism. With apparitions and everything, when an apparition reveals something, such revelations are classified as private, meaning that they do not have to be believed and can add nothing substantial to the original deposit of faith. Yes. So it's saying, you can believe in these things, but it's, not a requirement, to be a Catholic.
Yes. And I appreciate that because they could make great hay saying, well, these things are happening. So it shows this is the one true faith, so you should believe in them and you believe in the faith and all that stuff. So I like that. That's good. It's more responsible. So the social apostolate,
yes.
Yeah. So what do we talk about? Humanitarianism, which is generally a good thing.
I would say so.
Yes, but it's a little bit different than humanism, which is kind of a perversion of. It's kind of like a religious belief in the goodness of humanity, I think.
Yeah.
In any event, so what is humanitarianism? That's just trying to alleviate suffering from like the poor, the sick, elderly, children, puppies. Maybe not so much puppies, but all the others. Really a big movement, a big change in the 19th century where you have really more active and organized efforts. And the author claims, and I think this is true, that the people in this era became less fatalistic about their circumstances and about religious belief and that they can make a difference. And this is accompanied by huge improvements in agriculture and big time improvements in sanitation. And in medicine, of course. However, it also corresponded with a huge change because of the Industrial Revolution of people moving from the agrarian society, subsistence farming and all that stuff, into packing them into larger metropolitan areas, and all the problems associated with that in a deregulated environment with no social safety net.
Yeah.
or zoning codes or any of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So what are these efforts? Well, there's Ozanam, Frederick Ozanam, who formed the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, based upon the beliefs and the teachings of St. Vincent de Paul, which is the organization that we've talked about before, that is all around the place here. Big charitable organization of the Catholic Church, and they do great work. That's an example. And then the book kind of segues into the competing philosophy, which is a laissez-faire deregulation philosophy that is just complete unregulated capitalism.
Yeah.
It says, kind of like goes along with this, strongest survive mentality. And that was opposed at the time by utopian socialists generally, who are as the author mentions, they're the heir to Rousseau, the hated philosopher, because they believed in an ideal society could be created based upon the innate human goodness, which I think is the biggest mistake of any organizational philosophy for government in the history of the world.
I agree. I agree.
Any thoughts about any of that? I've kind of gone through them. I go to the next, our friend and favorite.
Yeah, I mean, that just bleeds right into Karl Marx, one of, I think, genuinely the worst people to ever exist, I would say.
He's a bad person personally, too.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll have people that have bad philosophies, and they're like, they're otherwise that's kind of interesting. They're pretty nice people.
They're just kind of like kooky writers, but no, he's like an awful, horrible person that let his children starve to death. Yeah.
Yes. Really, really horrible person. And so he was basically, in his own way, a utopian socialist, but he didn't really believe in utopia. He just believed that the government should force people to be socialists. And of course, he's famously hostile to the church, especially the Catholic Church, which he believed religion was the opium of the masses. Which is kind of funny because I think Marxism really is an opiate for the stupid. I'm a Marxist. I believe in good things. Oh, man, why don't you do some hard work and actually alleviate some suffering in the world rather than just being a pest to everyone and just smelly? Here's some cheese. Here's some Bosco sticks. Go feed somebody. But anyway, so I had not heard of this group, or I'd forgotten about them, the communards, which it seems to me like a cross between communists and retards. I don't know if you're supposed to say that. That's the first thing I had, communard. But they took control of Paris in 1871. I don't remember reading about this before. They executed the archbishop, and ultimately they lost control, and 20,000 of the communards were executed.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's a lot of people being executed.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
it sounds like what did they do in Seattle? Chaz, but like on a bigger scale, on a bigger, more dangerous, more successful scale, where the communist retards, if you will, took over and made their own autonomous zone, and tried to farm.
You're not allowed to use that pejorative term.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
Stop doing that. Only people over 50 who grew up calling each other retards can say the word retard, unless you're Sarah Palin, and then she gets upset with you. It's true. She started the movement that you can't say somebody.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, because she had that kid that was retarded.
Oh,
but she does. She has a kid that's retarded, and she was all over the media. So you can't call my kid retarded. We're like, well, he's retarded. He's mentally retarded. Well, that's not what that means. That's a pejorative term. Well, it's pejorative because he doesn't have the intellectual capacity of an average, normal, healthy person. Well, you can't say that in a word that most effectively portrays that condition. Oh, that makes sense. Anyway, so you can't. Don't you do it? You'll get in trouble.
I won't.
They'll forgive me because who cares? Who cares?
Yes.
I'm about to go out to pasture as it is. All right, industrialism. I don't even need to say anything about that, other than there were philosophers, including people in the clergy, that really supported just wages based upon organizational principles based upon the old medieval guilds. which I actually do support. I think labor unions of skilled labor are helpful and appropriate.
Mhm.
So
And that gets into, I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but with the Catholic, the actual economic theory that the Catholic Church officially supports,
yes.
a corporatism, I think is very much based on that exact principle.
Yes. Yeah. So what do we want to talk about? We're going to talk about rerum novarum.
Rerum novarum, or rerum novarum. I guess if you're doing ecclesiastical pronunciation, you'd pronounce the V like a V.
Just new things.
New things, yes.
And it was on capital labor.
Yes.
So it's Pope Leo the
13th,
who was, I guess he reigned from 1878 to 1903. So during that period of time. Here, was it an encyclical or some sort of publication?
It's an encyclical, yeah.
That affirmed the dignity of labor, all labor, and the right to a just wage, and condemned heartless, unrestrained, fair market. Let's see, unrestrained. I can't read my notes. Unrestrained.
It condemned, the heartlessness of the unrestrained free market and affirmed the dignity of labor, labor's right to a just wage.
Yes. And so kind of affirming the Catholic ideal of cooperation based upon justice instead of this conflict between the social Darwinism, the strongest survive, or whoever makes more money is good.
Yeah.
And the dispute between them and the Marxists, which believed in the state control. The Catholic is like a third way, which is much better than those two.
Yeah. And because I've come around to really more so agree with this belief, and I will get more into the details here.
Are you going to read the quote I was going to read?
I don't think so, but I was just going to say, okay, read the quote.
Because I am 100% believe this is correct. And this is on page 357. And this is kind of like my political view of, but this might be my total governmental political view. The spiritual welfare of mankind as the highest purpose of society, the primacy of the family, natural rights, a spirit of cooperation rather than conflict, private property as modified by the demands of justice, and subsidiary, the principle that every social issue should be resolved at the most immediate level possible, first the family, then the local government, then the central government, only as a last resort. I think that's like my political philosophy.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but I was going to say is because I think especially like a lot of times, like a lot of high schoolers especially go through like their libertarian phase, and everything should be free market, let everybody do whatever they want, and stuff like that. But I've especially come around to really this principle here. The solution to communism and everything, which I've always known was horrible and awful, isn't just let everybody do whatever they want. It's this third ground that the church supports, and that is, I think, really the approach that I think more people should be advocating for, and I don't see enough people advocating for, really at all.
I think that the populist wing of the
I was going to say the same.
Party is the only ones that really espouse this with any sort of consistency. You see a similar thing like from J.D. Vance. I don't agree with him on everything. Even kind of Rand Paul-ish, although he's more libertarian. But you see a lot of this from like DeSantis, certainly Josh Hammer, and those speakers, those goodwill or good, what do they call it? Good, the conservative.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. The common good conservatives.
Common good conservatives.
And Josh Hawley too, I think, is another name to mention.
Yeah. Hawley, you're right. Yeah. So he's right in that, I think, the sweet spot. And if we can just get that out, and I think it really should resonate with the activist left-wingers. It should. But I mean, they don't like this idea of the problems being dealt with at the lowest level of government. They want everything centrally controlled. But I think, practically speaking, if you really get into them, into the details of any policy, they're going to agree to it. Because when you say, okay, what about in this neighborhood? Who's the best one to make a decision for this neighborhood? Well, this activist down the street. They never say the dude in Washington D.C. So I think if we can communicate more about this theory, I think it really does. It does sell, but we're kind of getting past being able to communicate, I think, in some ways. So what else am I going to talk about here?
I think just going over what corporatism is. I know we've kind of talked around it a little bit, but just kind of give a definition. It's an ideal according to which society was to be organized around natural social groups or corporations, essentially churches, families, and trades. So along that principle of subsidiarity, whatever is closest to the problem, that is how we should structure society, essentially.
Yes. You actually cut out for a minute there, so I didn't hear anything you said.
Well, I hope it came across the recording.
Yes. Well, I was going to talk about corporatism.
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead. Maybe we'll say it twice.
No, that was good. So we want to talk about the next. There's the discussion of labor unions and the welfare state, which was, he mentions that Bismarck was really the first, he called it a conservative ruler that had these social programs. Bismarck was a socialist. He was really a precursor to Nazis. Without a lot of the Nazism. But that's what his social programs were. It's a nationalized economy, a nationalized benefits, and a secular government state substitute for.
I think the reason he calls him a conservative is because he mentions, his opponents were the liberals who at the time, classical liberalism, those were the advocates of laissez-faire. So if he's opposed to the liberals, then he's conservative, I guess, vaguely in some regard.
It was the first time I really thought, this author, I don't think he has the right deal on that. But anyway, so there's a discussion of, I don't know if we want to, am I going too fast? Secularism.
No, go ahead.
So secularism really kind of comes to the forefront where the people are advocating for, and it may be the first time in European history, really having this belief that there should be no church involved in government, and that church attendance is falling, in the late 1800s, except for maybe in Ireland.
Yeah.
And so there's discussions of specific issues that are addressed by the secular movement, contraception, as far as trying to get the church and the government out of those kind of issues, and Catholic marriage. Like where Leo the 13th reiterated Catholic doctrine, again affirming its indissolubility. Yeah. Yes, and condemning divorce, and that it's because it's his belief, the Catholic belief, that the family is the foundation of society. But also saying he definitively affirmed that marriage was a free union based upon mutual love, which I don't know. It had been official church teaching before that is the main thing. But anyway, so I thought this was kind of an interesting point that except in Anglo-Saxon countries, urbanization led to secularization. But in Anglo-Saxon countries, it didn't. It didn't. And the author says, for reasons that are unclear. I don't know why that is. But I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
Because France, during this period of time, really became very much more secular, but England and the United States didn't. But I don't know. What else want to say? So that urbanization. The cult of progress.
Yeah,
and I kind of believe in this. There's the severing of ties with the land, with this industrialization, which ends up. With these scientific and technological advances, you have this almost cultish belief that we're going to keep progressing and that we can know everything through these scientific and technological advances. And Victor Davis Hanson, one of my favorite commentators and authors, writes a lot about this acceleration in the last 100 years in American history. That there's too many people that have absolutely no idea how the land works, and there's no connection to where their food comes from, and those kind of natural disappointments, and the crops fail. There's so many variables, and you're such at the mercy of nature, and you live in nature. And I'm not just talking about going for a hike when you're on vacation. I'm talking about like living there. Yeah. Even if you just live in a rural area, I think you have a different connection to God, and certainly to the land, because it's like you observe it more, and you're affected by it more. It's different being in a rural area during a thunderstorm than it is in a big city. It feels different. Yeah,
I think that's true. I mean, coming up here to Kirksville and everything, Truman State Just the difference between the locals and the students, right? Because all the students, generally come from, non-religious or nominally religious backgrounds anyway, coming up here, it seems like. But it's like, the difference between someone visiting Kirksville and someone living in Kirksville. The Kirksvillians, care a whole lot, about their land. It's a very agricultural area, and stuff like that. And so they're going to care a whole lot more about, the weather and then the people that are coming into their town and stuff like that. But the students, don't care about anything that happens in Kirksville. What happens in Kirksville is whatever. Take it or leave it, essentially.
When I go up to Kirksville, I'm astounded by you're North Missouri, so it's similar to Iowa.
Yeah,
these great plains, and it's kind of unsettling that the horizon goes for so far.
Yeah,
and I get a little nervous with a storm coming in. It's like it's different because
it's true.
You just feel like you'd be swept off the earth.
Yeah, that's what it was like. It just stormed. Yesterday and then the day before, it's been cold and rainy and miserable. It's scarier, being in a storm and up here than it is, I think, back home.
Well, and of course I'm there. I'm in a stay at a hotel. I don't feel the same when I'm in a hotel, but I'm driving into town. There's great expanses of just through farmland. I'm like, I don't want to get into town before the storm comes in. But anyway, so there's something to that. There's some sort of religious aspect of living closer to land. But then for some reason, the author brings up the syllabus of errors again. And I like this section of syllabus of errors because the syllabus of errors also condemned a number of political philosophies, which I kind of agree with. The condemnation. Rationalism, meaning that we can just understand everything about God and the world through our mental facilities. Pantheism, which belief that everything is God. Naturalism, I guess, is the same kind of thing. Pantheism, everything is God, and naturalism is.
Well, naturalism says that. Well, naturalism is different. Denied the reality of the supernatural.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. And then, what is it? How do you pronounce it?
Indifferentism,
which held that all beliefs were mere opinions. I like condemning that.
Yeah.
Because you know what? Sometimes your opinion is wrong. That's my favorite.
Yes, I know that's your favorite quote.
Of myself.
I have it on the back of a T-shirt, actually.
It should be on the front. And then utilitarianism, which made practical results the sole guide to moral action, which is really, really evil in practice. And I don't think people really appreciate that as much as they should. So then we get to really the end of the Enlightenment era with Hume and Kant, and those philosophers. Hume dying in 1776 and Kant in 1804. Where they're believing that God couldn't be known through reason, that it's necessary to have a belief in God to support a moral code. Generally, we're kind of simplifying it, but they're really kind of the spread, or what do you say, the popularity, I guess I should say, of Romanticism.
Yeah, which
I believe is really the modern New Age crap that you hear. Which is there's a reality beyond rational understanding, and I believe there's a mystery. There's mysteries, that belief. Here, maybe I'm misstating from my notes. So that the key to Romanticism is this belief that there's mysterious, powers that you can't understand.
Yeah, and a lot of the philosophers at this time, believe that there's some sort of like guiding spirit. Of the world, and all of history is just a manifestation of that driving spirit in some way. So sort of a weird sort of branch of deism in a way, of that there is some sort of God, but we don't really know him, but he's affecting the world in some vague sort of mystical way.
Right, and then and I like the way he describes this medievalism, where there's a superficial love of rituals, and you see that in some Catholic circles too.
Yeah,
today. They kind of want to recapture the Middle Ages, the mystery of the Middle Ages, and they want to go to the monasteries. Oh, do they know some secret understanding of the world, and are the people that want to go to Tibet and learn from the monks because they have some sort of spiritual understanding that is beyond our natural
I feel like that sort of spirit has moved into like the Eastern sort of New Age stuff, and that's I think what he says here. In sort of the next section, he says Romanticism was dangerous to religion and that its ultimate tendency was a kind of pantheism The deification of nature itself provided a seductive, powerful alternative to Christianity, new way of disbelieving that accused Christianity of having captured the sense of mystery for its own purposes. And he has in a footnote that exact idea. The modern New Age movement is simply the latest manifestation of this kind of romanticism. This sort of, organized religion has corrupted the truth. You can find, real meaning by, paying attention to nature and the stars. And I think a lot of the obsession with astrology sort of came from this, and sort of the Eastern sort of styles of meditation and stuff like that.
Is there a thing going on with the youth of today, like these gals believing in astrology or knowing about astrology? Is that a thing?
A lot of people know about astrology. I haven't met many people. I've met maybe one or two, or at least heard of one or two, like up here, that actually believe that their star sign means something about their personality. A lot of people know of their star sign and like know the star charts or whatever, but I think few people actually believe that it has an impact on them.
Let's hope so. That's kooky. So then the book goes into science, and then it becomes many scientists it becomes a form of materialistic thought.
Yeah,
I think I'm in that, aren't I? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Catholics in science, but there were still some scientists that were very devout, like Pasteur, who has studied germs and the
inventor of pasteurization.
Pasteurization, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we have.
Gregor Mendel as well, with gene theory, I think is important.
And then the author mentions that it helped strengthen the arguments against abortion because scientists discovered that life begins at conception.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been known by intelligent people for a couple hundred years, but seems to be a mystery to most modern women and the guys that don't want to pay child support.
Yeah, no kidding.
Which is a cynical reading, but too accurate for us to stand, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then there's just kind of a really brief discussions about this kind of scientific developments, as far as biblical criticism and historical scholarship, getting a better, firmer grasp on studying the Bible and history, mm-hmm. and then there's just kind of a mention of modernism, without really getting into much detail. Yeah. We're going to get to that a little bit later. And then, of course, a discussion of atheism.
Mm-hmm. I do want to mention before you move on to that really quick, with the modernism, I think this is an idea that we've said many times. I know I've said it many times, but just to sort of hear what the author says. In modernity, that the outlook was reversed, as the modern was automatically assumed to be superior to the old and changed Protestant wisdom and freedom. And that's just like the accepted belief by so many people today. Whatever new is good, whatever old is bad. As long as it's new, it brings wisdom, it brings freedom, whatever. If it's old, that's just how we were held back in the past. Yeah. That's just like the dominant, philosophy among a lot of people today.
It's a good point. That modernistic theory, and it's really this kind of progressivism that any change is a progress going forward, mm-hmm. and that's not always the case.
No, not at all.
The default position. If this change must be good because it's different from the past.
It might be new, but that doesn't mean it's moving forward necessarily.
Yeah. And there's so many people are so historically illiterate that they don't realize it's not really new.
Yeah, that's true.
The stuff might be new.
Yeah. It's like I can come up with a lot of new bad ideas. That does not make them good ideas.
Well, I don't know that there's a whole lot of new
ideas.
I don't know. Let's see. We're running out of ideas. As far as political philosophy and religion.
Yeah.
So atheism became more accepted by more people in this era. And I think we haven't got to that because this is where I was planning on stopping, because we're in the pre-World War I era. And I think that, I don't know, I haven't read ahead, but I'm assuming that there'll be more of a discussion of atheism after World War I, because
we get all the way up into World War II and beyond, I think, at the end of this chapter. So focusing.
I'm thinking that there'd be some discussions of that, because there was a real challenge for all people of thought with people's murder and slaughter of people for good reason.
True. Very true.
Anyway, any other thoughts? I kind of went through this pretty quick. I thought
that was great. Those were good summaries. I really like this chapter. I thought there's a lot of good stuff in there. And at some points, I kind of agree with more of what the Catholic Church was doing at the time than I thought I would. kind of looking into the corporatism, the subsidiarity, and stuff like that. I think those are great principles, and I think we should see more people, I think more politicians really affirm those, if at all possible.
I think part of the reason why the Catholic Church in this section of Catholic history is doing so much better is because we're getting kicked out of the government. And don't you think? I mean, it's like the more they're involved in the day-to-day operations of government, the more corrupt it was, and the less they were really doing the right thing. So, anyway,
very true.
At least our modern Catholic Church isn't in the government.
Yeah. Although I did like Pope Pius IX. I kind of liked what he had to say. I'll have to look more into him with his kind of weird takes on religious freedom and freedom of speech and stuff. Not that I necessarily agree with him, but it's a theory where I can kind of see where he's coming from a little bit. And I liked what he says about the condemning liberalism. That was pretty good.
Yeah, he condemned a lot of things.
Yeah.
Issued a syllabus of bad things. Pretty good. All right. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. I think that was good. Well, this has been Season 6, Episode 16 of Unlimited Opinions. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.
I think so. Are you not? Sounded confused.
Trying to say it a different way each time.
Oh, that's good. Well, you've probably missed the last 150 episodes, and you've said it the same way for years now.
I have not said it the same way every time.
We're coming up on 3 years of doing this podcast in a month. It's crazy.
I'm still amazed that you're still wanting to talk to me once a week.
That's fun.
You're willing to do it. I'm going to keep going.
Sure.